I am Michael Prentky. This is Jeb Bishop. Welcome to the inaugural Bos Bones podcast.
Hello. Yeah. Congratulations.
So I'm here trying to talk to all kinds of Boston trombonists. And
Yeah.
I guess first off, would you even consider yourself a Boston trombonist?
Well, yeah. My wife and I moved to Boston about almost exactly 5 years ago now. So, and I've been, up until the beginning of the pandemic, I was playing around here quite a bit and working with a lot of Boston musicians. So sure, I'm a Boston trombonist.
Yeah, I thought so too, which is why I reached out to you, but I also acknowledge that you're relatively new. I mean, 5 years. So it's not that much time.
Well, there's probably people you can talk to who've, gotten out of school less than 5 years ago or something, who are playing around and stuff, So I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting way to put it, because I was thinking about that, who I reached out to and what that meant. And I honestly didn't really want to reach out to students because it's such a different experience. You know, even if you're here for 4 years as a student, you're not really interacting usually with the scene in a bigger way.
That's true. Yeah.
So you've been here for about the same time as like an undergraduate student, but you've only been in the scene, so it's kind of a different experience.
Yeah, and when I showed up, I mean, I already had musical relationships with a number of well-established musicians here.
Yeah. Who are some of those people?
Jorrit Dijkstra, saxophonist and composer, band leader. Pantelis Karayorgis, pianist, composer, band leader, and both of those guys were on a label called Drift. And I had already, been on some Drift recordings. And before moving here, I had come to Boston, I think, a year or so before, and participated in a Drift festival that they put on at the Lily Pad. And who else? Nate Mcbride, a bass player who's been here for quite a while, and he lived in Chicago for a long time. And he and I played together a lot in Chicago. So when I came here, so the three of them were the ones who I would say I knew the best. But I had met Charlie Kohlheis before. I don't think I had played with him before coming to Boston, but I had certainly met him on trips to Boston, and so we knew each other. And then I've been playing with him regularly since I've been here. And who else? Kurt Newton is another one I had played with in Chicago. And, I've been working with him regularly since I got here. Eric Rosenthal I had met also on trips here, but I had not played with him. But then he and I have been playing together. So I had like various knowledge of the scene and contacts and things like that. Yeah.
So it seems like there's kind of like a Chicago-Boston connection in some ways.
Yeah, in those senses that I just talked about. I mean, Jorrit went out of his way to come to Chicago starting back around 2000, if I'm remembering right. And he came there and started a band with Chicago musicians called the Flatlands Ensemble, because Chicago is flat and he's from the Netherlands, which is famously flat. So he had this comparison between that. So that group did some touring and some recording, and then he kind of expanded it later into a larger thing called Pillow Circles when he got a composition commission from the North Sea Jazz Festival, and then he added more musicians to kind of the same core, although it wasn't all the same. But anyway, that was sort of an outgrowth, or in a way, of the Flatlands thing. And then and I did.
You were a part of that group, the Flatlands group.
I was part of the Flatlands group. I was part of this Pillow Circles thing, which played at North Sea. That was like he got commissioned to rehearse and present this group and record. So we did a recording with that. And then he and I also have a duo that did a duo recording in Chicago. And then we've done some touring with that also. So, and then, Jordan, Pandalise, and Nate and I are all in a band called Cutout with Luther Gray on drums, who is someone I only met when I moved here, although I knew about him before. And that band has a CD out, and we've done a little bit of touring. And so there's lots of things. We also had, even before I came to Boston with Jord and Pandalise, we had a thing called the Whammies, which was based around the music of Steve Lacy. And that band has done like 3 CDs and some touring and everything. So, this is all, at least in my case, that was all while I was still in Chicago. So there was a lot of, Boston related activity even before I left Chicago.
So it seems like it was actually like a fairly streamlined segue, because you already had some significant connections to the scene and you'd been here a little bit. I guess I'm wondering, were there any major, I guess like shifts or like any major differences that you had to kind of adjust to moving here?
Well, one thing I should say is we didn't come straight from Chicago to Boston. My wife and I we're both from North Carolina, and we went back to North Carolina for 3.5 or so years, and were there before we came to Boston. So we went back there for reasons related to my family and her job, without getting into all the details. And then probably the main contributing factor to us coming here was, again, that she got an attractive job offer here. So we decided, and there were things about living down in North Carolina that I like, but it's weird to go back to where you grew up after 20 years or whatever. And musically, there are things happening there, and I had a lot of good experiences there, and I still have musical connections there. But for me, it was kind of not enough in a way, So the chance to come to Boston and check that out. Plus, it was a really good career opportunity for her. So putting all that together, it made sense for us to come here after North Carolina. But the plan was, no, we didn't go from Chicago and then like, oh, we're going to Boston. We kind of, the decision, the job thing and the decision to come here all happened really pretty quickly and in kind of an unforeseen way. So it was kind of, I don't want to say accidental, but we didn't have a long-term plan to wind up in Boston, and now here we are.
Sure. That's kind of the couples calculus, all the equations and mathematics we have to do when we're making decisions within a couple.
Yeah.
You said that North Carolina wasn't really enough, and I'm wondering, why wasn't that enough, and has Boston been enough for you as a player?
Well, I mean, for what I do, the kind of, I guess you could say, kind of niche kind of stuff that I'm mostly associated with, that exists down there. It was just kind of a much smaller scene, and you could perform around there. But in terms of like, for example, a larger scene where I can go see a lot of other musicians doing their thing, or musicians coming through from out of town a lot who are that, I mean, again, all that does actually kind of exist there, but, and I don't want to overemphasize that factor, because for me, it had as much to do with just feeling strange living in that part of the world again. And also there were factors about my wife's job, which had played into it also. It's a complicated subject. But as far as Boston goes, I mean, there are the caliber of musicians here is amazing, and I've had a lot of great experiences here and have been able to play a lot and record and use it as a base for some things. Get to New York a few times. I mean, we can get into it. Well, maybe we can get into it now, but as far as Boston being enough, my main reservation about it has always been the kind of performance and venue situation here, because it's the outlets where you can present at least the kind of thing I do are very limited. You have to pay to rent them for performance, which is far from ideal and has not been the case anywhere else that I've been. And even some of those have closed down, even before the pandemic. So that aspect of it is distinctly less than ideal from my point of view.
Sure.
And I know a lot of other musicians have the same, sort of complaint, if you want to call it that, about it.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know what the structural reasons are that make Boston that way compared to anywhere else I've been. I don't know how much that, like the paying to rent the venue thing, for example, I don't know how much that's the case in New York. Maybe it is, I don't know. It wasn't the case at all in Chicago generally. And yeah, that's the main issue that I would say I have, is the difficulty in having like a wider variety of venues, and feeling like the venues are kind of integrated with the kind of scene that I'm in, as opposed to just kind of people who run venues, and I don't want to overstate my dissatisfaction with it, because the people who run the venues are cool, they're the ones that I've had dealings with. But there's something structural about the scene being like that, at least for me, is, if I was doing more like straight ahead jazz kind of gigging, or whatever you want to call it, maybe that would look different. I don't know how Boston looks for people who are more identified with that kind of scene. I mean, what I do is kind of mostly, as I said, niche anyway. So, in a sense, like Chicago, for example, is kind of not artificially, but unusually rich in different kinds of places where you can go and present that kind of thing. And, somebody's doing it every night of the week. There's a large scene, and the people who promote that stuff and present it are committed to it in a way that's similar to the way the musicians are committed to it. So,
yeah.
I get less of a sense of that here, I guess I would say.
Definitely. I've felt the same way, and I've heard that from many people. A lot of musicians feel that way. I have a sense that things were different, maybe 10, 20 years ago. Not even have a sense. I know things were different. I don't know the details.
In Boston, you mean?
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of part of why I want to do this podcast, is I want to talk to more people. So I'm excited to learn more about that. I guess where I'm going with this is, I've seen videos of, like, I think maybe in the 90s, there was a pretty experimental music scene, and Tom Plisek was a big part of that. Do you know about Tom? Do you know him?
Yeah, I know who he is. I haven't met him. I've heard him a bit. Fantastic trombone player, and he's like kind of a department head at Berkeley or something, right?
Yeah, I think so.
No, I never have met him. A long time ago, Joe Morris played me a recording of the two of them playing some duo, like free improvisation, which was great. And then I haven't, I haven't, since I've been in Boston, as far as I know, I haven't had a lot of chances to see him perform. I don't know how often he gets out and plays these days, but I'd love to sometime, but I have not so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if maybe you could talk about, of the few venues that are here, what are some of your favorite spots that you play or hear music?
Yeah, I mean, there's places I still haven't even been yet. I haven't been to the Regatta Bar, for example. Was it the Beehive? I haven't been there. But as far as places I play, I mean, there's been this regular series at the Lily Pad that Eric Rosenthal organizes, 0.01%. And the group Cutout that I mentioned before has had kind of a semi-regular slot on that series, or connected to that series, for quite a while. Everything I say about performing is pre-pandemic, of course.
Sure.
And then apart from that, there have been other times, the Lily Pad's also a place that I booked myself and presented some stuff at a few times, and have played with other people who invited me to play or whatever. There's the Outpost, close to the Lily Pad. Played there quite a bit. Rob, who runs that place, is a great guy who has a real interest in the music. So that's, that's a positive thing. The thing about the Outpost was that even before the pandemic, he got, as I understand it, kind of shut down by Cambridge for not having the right official licensing situation or whatever he needs for that. which is weird because he'd been doing it for a long time, and it had even been, the Outpost had even been sort of officially recognized by the city as a, you know, a significant cultural institution or place, features in the newspaper and things like that. So it's a little weird that they would come down on him, and maybe some neighbors complained or something. I don't know. And he was, you know, that by the time the pandemic hit, that had not been resolved. So the Outpost had already been out of the picture by that time. And I have no idea. I haven't heard any news at all about what that looks like for whenever live music starts happening again around here. I don't know what that's going to look like, nor do I know what the lily pad is going to look like for that matter. I mean, I'm hoping that, you know, Gil will be able to keep it going and still put stuff on there, because it's a really good room to play in and has a great vibe about it, and it's the right size of kind of room I like to play in, that kind of thing. There was a place in Somerville. What was that called now?
Third Life?
Third Life, yeah, that place. That was another place similar to, you know, Outpost and Lily Pad, kind of a similar situation. That shut down also kind of, you know, well before the pandemic for, I guess, economic reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was another one. And then let's see. Apart from those, I've been fortunate to do a number of concerts organized and presented by this organization, Non-Event, who put on a lot of different music and performance, you know, events. Even though they're called Non-Event, they really present events, I would say. And they use a bunch of different venues for that, which have been really cool. You know, there have been some at the, what do you call it, that old waterworks museum. Yeah. That place is amazing because it has all of the old, what used to be the actual water pumping equipment for Boston. Must have been much smaller then, but even so, it's like this amazing kind of steampunk, you know, environment full of these incredible structures and tubes. It almost looks like Dr. Seuss, Willy Wonka kind of vibe in there, you know, but it's a great room for music if you deal with the room on its own terms, because it's this large, very reverberant space, and it's not set up to be a performance room because there's all this stuff in the way, so you have to set up seats around that and figure out where you're going to play. But I've played there a couple times and seen some really good shows there. That's a really cool space. But they use other spaces too. I did a show through them with Joe McPhee and some other Boston musicians in a church in Cambridge. I've seen shows they've done at a couple of university spaces. They use a bunch of different rooms. They also had like a smaller, well, there was a show I did at Cafe Feeks in, let's see, I think that's in Brookline.
Cafe Feeks, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, they're associated. It's the same people who run that 3 Pond Cafe in Jamaica Plain. I think it's the same owners. Anyway, it's a small coffee house, and they had I did a solo show there, and that got recorded, and I eventually released it as a cassette.
Nice.
Solo performance. There's also a guy, Alex Lemsky, who he organizes and presents shows using different venues. He has a good mailing list and is able to get people out to shows. So I've done some things that he's organized, and he's continuing. Even in the pandemic, he's figured out a way to organize some shows outdoors, and he organized a cutout show at a very large cathedral in Cambridge that we managed to do in a distanced manner because it was such a big space. We were kind of this is like a huge cathedral, and we're kind of on I don't know if it's the altar or whatever you call it, but it's a big space up in the front, and then there's distanced people in the pews, like spread out. So we were able to do a show under those circumstances, and a couple of outdoor things. Yeah. So that's, you put all that together. There's Non-Event, there's Alex, there's those venues that may or may not continue to exist later. I don't know.
Crossing fingers.
Yeah. But then there's other places. I've played a few times at there's the bar down here in JP,
Midway
the Midway, yeah, Midway Cafe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there have been some shows there. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Classic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Classic
Yeah,
space.
I like playing bars, so that's been a fun place to play.
And were you doing like kind of your, I don't know, improvised music there, like your own stuff at the Midway?
We did a couple of straight up free improvisation gigs there. Yeah,
Wow,
I
I'd be
didn't
really
organize
curious
them, but yeah.
to see what the reaction would be, because it's kind of a
Well, it was
bar,
good. I mean,
right?
the guy who runs it, I don't really know him personally, but my understanding is he's actually pretty open to this stuff. He's friends with Jim Hobbs, for example, and Hobbs and his group were doing a regular monthly thing there on Wednesday nights, or once a month on Wednesday. It was always the same night as the cutout shows. So we would do cutout at the Lily Pad, and then sometimes I'd go over and catch, fully celebrated at the Midway late night. But the free improvisation thing I did, there's one that comes to mind. Maybe there was more than one, but we played like on the floor, and it was earlier in the evening, like before whatever other stuff they had going on later. But it worked out really well. It was a welcoming environment, and people came out to see it. And I think there have been a number of things like that.
Nice.
At least it's the guy's open to it. So, but they book, again, I hope they survive all this, but they're the kind of place that books like a bunch of bands per night, like every night. So you get a slot and you come in and do your thing, and then it's whatever. But
right.
But yeah, that's been a good experience.
It seems like the number of like formal, like official venues, like standalone venues, is actually pretty small. There's Outpost and Lily Pad and Midway. There's like a handful of spots, but then it's almost doubled by like non-traditional venue spaces like churches or cafes or like or house shows and all kinds of other stuff. What have you done many house shows, or what do you think about the sort of all these non-traditional venue spaces?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Have I done a house show in Boston? Yeah, Yorit, the saxophone player, has presented some stuff at his house. He has a really good, where he lives now, which is in Quincy.
Right.
He has a really good space for that. And for example, Eugene Chadbourne came from out of town, and we did something with him at the Lily Pad, but we also, the night before, we did a thing at Yorit's house, which was kind of a combination of open rehearsal and house show. So yeah, no, I love that kind of thing. I've heard about Brittany Carlson told me she was organizing some things like that, but I haven't gotten to do that yet. When we were living in Durham in North Carolina, we had a house, and we presented at our house. We did a couple of house shows ourselves, my wife and I, in our living room there. So it's a really fun thing to do. It's you don't need to get that many people for it to feel like a good gemütlich kind of atmosphere. You can have food and drink and stuff, and everybody has a good time, and it's cool.
It feels to me like, in my own memory, now that I'm thinking of it, there's been such a strong scene of house shows in all kinds of situations. Like I think notably in like, Alston, Brighton, there's all the college kids doing punk shows, underground shows. But then even like I used to go to these like Brazilian forró shows like in houses, and people were dancing in the living room. These jazz shows. It's interesting to see how much people are doing music at home, maybe out of comfort, but maybe also out of necessity. It's kind of both.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a clear sense of where things are going with the pandemic and all, but it seems like if a lot of venues are struggling or are going to go under or whatever, then especially for the kind of stuff that doesn't attract a big audience, the house shows might be a really viable way to continue for a while after it's safe to get everybody together again.
Yeah. The
and I mean, a long way back, I was connected to a kind of a punk rock scene in North Carolina back in the 80s. And I mean, house shows were, of course, a big part of that. I mean, I just like that aesthetic, and I like the sense of, you want to have a show, you can put on music in your apartment or whatever, your backyard. And it's a good feeling. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. My partner, she's from LA originally, and she has this she's sort of quipped and joked that one of the best parts of Boston is not Boston, but the proximity to everything else. Having proximity to New York City, having proximity
Mm-hmm.
to Cape Cod, having
Mm-hmm.
proximity to Western Mass, or going up
Yeah.
north to maybe Canada or Maine or
Yeah.
Vermont. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I'm wondering, where was I going with that? How,
I mean, that's an aspect of it too. If we talk about venues, I could mention that I've been to Providence to play a few times. It's a
Providence
good
is
place
great.
there. The
Yeah.
Machines with Magnets space down there. It's a good studio where we've done some recording, and I've had some really good shows there in that space. There's also this Middle Eastern restaurant down there called Tea in Sahara, and the guy who runs it is really into the music, and so I've played there a few times, and you just go down and you just set up in the front, and we play like, or even in the back sometimes, and you can just play. We play the most out music we want, and and he's cool with it, and it doesn't even. I mean, even the people who are there to eat even don't seem bothered by it, which I was a little surprised by. But it was, that's been some good things like that. Or, I've been to a couple times with Charlie Colhase with the Explorers Club. We drove over to New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There's like a community radio station there, and we did a gig there. Those gigs are hilarious because, speaking of proximity, to me it's just funny that I could drive, like get picked up. I don't have a car, but I'll get picked up and get a ride to Portsmouth with Seth, Mike, the sax player, or somebody. Get to Portsmouth, play like a full 2-set gig, drive back to Boston, and then both times I've done that, I've been back here and like in bed before midnight. Yeah.
Yeah.
I drove to another state, played 2 sets, probably went and got something to eat, and then got back here before midnight. I was, in Chicago, the second set wouldn't even have started yet, and here I am. It's all over, and I'm back home. It's a different. In general, that whole earlier thing, things are earlier here with the music.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, that seems like a cultural shift for a lot of people, or people complain that the city shuts down early. How's that kind of affected you?
I definitely don't spend as much time out, and I go to bed earlier. Even before the pandemic, that was, so that's probably healthy. But it's true, it does. That was that's a difference, I mean, in Chicago, the gigs would sometimes start, well after 10, and here they're often, we're done by then. So.
Yeah, I guess it depends. A lot of places will shut down by 2, last call at 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does tend to end earlier.
I mean, I've heard these stories, on the venue thing about these amazing venues in the past here, like I guess the 1369 space down the street from the Lily Pad used to be some kind of amazing jazz club where, like,
it's now a cafe, but yeah,
Chick Corea and all these people played.
Yeah,
I've heard some stories about that. There's like video of it, and that was like these heavyweights would come and play there. Or I guess there used to be this place called the Willow. Did you know about that?
Never heard of the Willow.
There was some kind of maybe a bar that had a room for music, and that for a long time or for a while was apparently one of the main places to do any kind of more free or out or whatever you want to call it music. That was a good place for that. But that closed down. I don't know, it was before I got here, but it kind of feels like there hasn't been a replacement for that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad tale here. All these venues that shutter, they all just kind of die, and for every one that pops up, it seems like 2 or 3 shut down.
Well, I mean, I understand the economics must be difficult here just because the cost of everything, especially any kind of real estate related stuff, is just astronomically high here. So it's it's got to be a factor putting pressure on it.
Yeah.
What do you think the audience for this? We're doing the first episode here. Do you anticipate this being like watched mostly by trombone players, or what do you what do you think it's going to be?
I'm really curious to see what the viewership and listening will be like. I talked about this with a friend who is not a professional musician. He played in high school or whatever, but I don't think he identifies as a musician, but he's really into podcasts, and he was saying, I actually think this is a really exciting podcast because I think there's some kind of history and stories that will be relatable for all kinds of people, not just trombonists.
Yeah.
So maybe there will be people who are interested about learning about the music scene here in Boston who are not necessarily musicians, who are excited to listen, and maybe other trombonists from Boston, professional or amateur, and maybe people from all over the country or even world who want to learn about the trombonists in Boston. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, I'm not personally in a position to talk about the history much. Just, I haven't been here very long.
But you've already, I mean, you've shared a lot of really interesting perspective. You have a really unique kind of a niche within a niche, within the small city of Boston, and then the music scene and the trombonist, and then you're doing this kind of free improvised music. I mean, who else is really doing free improvised music on trombone in the city? You and Tom Plisek. I don't know. I guess maybe Eric Stillwell. He does some of that too.
I don't know him. I've seen that name, but I haven't run into him. I mean, there must be a million trombone players around here.
There's a lot
and everything.
There. I mean, when I started to make a list of all the people who I personally know or I'm aware of, I easily came up with, I don't know, like 40 or 50 names. So it's exciting to think about interviewing people. But not a lot of them who are doing what you're doing. So you're in an interesting position.
Well, I mean, it doesn't pay the bills, and a lot of people don't like it, just musically. There's also, Bill Lowe doesn't. I guess he lives. Do you know Bill?
I met him. Sure, he's an important figure for sure.
Yeah, and I guess he doesn't live in Boston, but he's come here and played a number of times, and I've played with him a bit and seen him perform. And, fantastic educator, musician.
Yeah, he's
great.
Probably a huge wealth of knowledge. I reached out to him, have yet to hear back, but I'd love to interview him.
Yeah, it's great to hear somebody playing like that on bass trombone too, because you really don't hear that often.
Yeah, definitely. All right, everybody, we're going to take a short break, so grab a snack, play some long tones, and we'll be back in a minute. Back to the show. Speaking of Bill and just thinking about all the other trombonists, I'm wondering, are there any trombonists in town that you've heard and particularly liked? Not to put you on the spot. You don't.
Yeah, I should have thought about that before.
No, it's okay.
I mean, the problem is I can think of some things and now the names are going to escape me because it's just people I've seen once or twice or here or there or something. Maybe I can get back to you on that.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about what are some of the most memorable gigs that you've played in town or in the area?
Yeah, you mentioned that, like you were asking about like nightmare gigs and stuff.
Yeah, any nightmares? Any tomatoes or eggs?
Well, I mean, just thinking back about my entire involvement over the last 20 plus years, I have a hard time thinking of any genuine nightmare gigs. Yeah, there have been things that have been a little weird or uncomfortable in some way, but like usually involves presenting kind of like challenging music in a setting that's not really appropriate, like a place where people are having dinner that's more like where they think they're going to have like dinner and hear some jazz or something, and then we come out and play this loud dissonant stuff or whatever. That I haven't had any nightmares along those lines, but sometimes you almost feel kind of bad for doing that, Yeah, it's like, it's not, you don't want to like ruin anybody's evening out or anything like that. But let's see the memorable gigs here. I mean, there's been plenty of musically wonderful gigs, that gig I mentioned earlier that Alex Lemsky presented at the church in Cambridge, which I'm forgetting the name of the church, with Joe McPhee. And that was also with Damon Smith on bass when he was living here, and Andrea Nicodemu, and Forbes Graham.
Yeah.
That was a really nice concert.
Yeah.
Joe and I did a short duo, and then the whole group played. That was the setting was really good, and Joe is a really special musician and somebody I have a long standing connection with, and it was just great to play in this context with him. Yeah. Then when Damon was here, he's a bass player and he runs a label and is very committed to free improvisation. And when he came here several years ago, he really hit the ground immediately, working to organize things and kind of make stuff happen. So that was a really positive thing. And then he ended up moving to St. Louis.
Wow.
Now a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So that's kind of missed in terms of his energy of organizing stuff, Yeah. Like he was the one he put it together for me to play with Rockalam Bob Moses for the first time at the Outpost, for example.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Do you think anybody is filling that void right now of organizing?
I mean, in the current situation, it's difficult to say because there's kind of nothing to organize, There have been people trying to solve this problem of how do you do this in a pandemic? And I've done a few remote internet things, but I have to say I haven't been that attracted to that idea, especially of trying to do a live real-time collaboration via the internet. And now I did do one like that I thought worked really well, which was a non-event show that we did in the Green Street Gallery at the Green Street T Station, not far from where I live in JP. There's a room there that's like an art gallery, and so we did a collaboration there with. I mean, they had non-event approached me and asked me if I wanted to do something, and it could have been just me doing a solo thing in my living room, but I wanted it to be more interesting than that somehow. So I thought I wanted to do a live real-time collaboration with Forbes Graham, but and I mean, Forbes can do whatever he wants, but my thought was that he could do some electronic processing or electronic response, because he does. I mean, he's a great, wonderful trumpet player, but also I really like his electronic stuff. So I approached him about it and was like, how would you feel about that? And he, immediately agreed to do it. So then Susanna at Non-Event suggested doing it in this Green Street T space. And then she also got Lani Asuncion on board, who's a video artist, who brought this really interesting angle and aesthetic to it. So it wound up being completely different than what I had envisioned. I thought at first, well, I'll be at home and then Forbes will be at home and we'll somehow cook up something together. But then it wound up being in this completely different space, and then the space was lit. And then the way she did it, which was really interesting, was Lani put a camera in the room that I was in. And then there are monitors around the space facing outward. So if you're outside the station or outside that room, there's big windows, and then there's these big monitors in the windows. And then she was outside. Well, how did this work? The camera that was in the room was actually going to those monitors. So you weren't just getting an image from the camera in the room of me going to the internet. You were getting the camera in the room of me going to the monitors. And then she was outside with a handheld camera videoing the monitor. Right. So what the images you saw of me were mostly me on these monitors, which introduced this kind of blown out, distorted visual aesthetic. But then you could also see beyond the into the room and see me walking around like in almost like I'm in a isolation chamber, which seemed appropriate for the current era. And then also there was a sound guy who's name I'm going to blank on. I'm very sorry to say right now, but he was in the next room with the laptop and coordinating the sound and mixing the sound. He had the microphone set up in the room. Kevin is his name, and he was mixing Forbes and me together. So Forbes was at home dealing with what I was playing in the room, going to Forbes, coming back through, and then that was going out onto the internet with the video accompanying. It's actually all on YouTube, the whole thing. So you can find the non-event as a YouTube channel. You can see it on there. But I was really happy with how that came out, and it came out really differently than anything I would have thought up just on my own. So that was a good example of a collaborative thing dealing with isolated online streaming pandemic conditions that I thought was an interesting response to that situation.
Yeah.
Other than that, though, the only pandemic things I've done have been kind of remote recording collaborations, and I've done a couple of those. One of them, Mary Stalbert's organized this thing called Distant Duos, where she's organized a whole bunch of these, where two people each record 5 minutes of stuff independently, and then she mixes them together. And there's a whole Bandcamp page of all of those duos. I did one with a drummer called Joseph Mauro, who was a Providence guy, but now I think he's living in Taipei or somewhere like that. And then there's my friends and colleagues in North Carolina. They have a label called Out and Gone Music. Dan Rucha, the viola player who I have a duo CD out with, he organized a series of larger ensemble recordings in it. And the idea there was that somebody would go first and do a recording, and then somebody else would listen to it and record along with it, listening to it for the first time. So they hadn't heard it before. But you would listen to what somebody else had done and wait a certain prescribed length of time, 30 seconds or something, and then come in and improvise along with what you're hearing. And then that was iterated until you had like a quartet, 4 different people all doing that.
Wow.
And he did a few different ensembles like that. And that's a digital release that you can get on Out and Gone called, what's it called? My memory is poor. Bird Songs of the something. Not of the Mesozoic. But if you look it Out and Gone, you'll find it. It's like these accumulative improvised quartets. That's the nature of that project. So
yeah, I think the collaboration that you're describing, I mean, that happens everywhere, and it's happening a lot online. I think what you were describing happening at the Green Street Tea Station, the non-event series, that's actually not entirely uncommon here. I feel like there's a lot of people around town doing a lot of interesting kind of intermedium collaborations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe like Boston Center for the Arts and like the was it the Bolodrome or whatever? Like I've heard about people doing stuff like sculpture and music and dance stuff over there. And also, are you aware of the Dreamscape series by the Boston Compass?
No.
That one's pretty cool too, and it also made me think about how you were talking about churches and how they play such an interesting role in the scene. How it's kind of unlikely that churches end up housing a lot of kind of weird music. They end up being these bastions for weirdness. And I mean that. I'm sure
it depends on the church, and the people. But I mean, a lot of them are very open to wanting to be part of the community and opening their doors to the community and letting people do, events that'll draw people together. And I think a lot of churches have that vision as part of what they want to do.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about any trombone stuff or no?
I don't know. Do you want to?
I mean, the trombone players are all out there like, well, what about the trombone?
Okay. Any juicy trombone stuff?
No, we don't have to.
Are you practicing much or?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, yeah, it's been off and on, I have to admit, because in some ways it seems like, okay, this is an ideal time to hunker down. And I've been doing some of that, but it turns out it's hard for me to really get motivated if I don't have anything on the horizon. You know what I mean?
Sure, definitely.
But I do have this semi-focused idea of stuff I'd like to work on. I mean, there's always tons of stuff to work on, you know. The problem is that, to be honest, I get kind of, at this point, if I'm being honest, some days I'm a little bored with the trombone, to be honest, you know. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time.
I understand.
And, you know, there's obviously, I mean, I'm 58 years old. There's way more to work on. I feel like, you know, I still feel like I'm at the bottom of the mountain. You know, I might have taken 2 or 3 steps up the side of the mountain or something, you know. And obviously, if I wanted to, there's so much that I could just spend all this time working on, but I don't feel myself drawn to like really work on my instrumental skills like that. I mean, I do it some, and I mean, I do want to do it, but I don't want to do it enough to where I'm like, yeah, my real goal in life is to be this completely monster technical trombone player, you know. I mean, I've put in a lot of time on the horn, and you have to put time in on the horn if you're going to keep doing it at all, because, as you know, it's the kind of thing that disappears quickly if you don't maintain it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like this young, hungry guy who wants to like prove to the world that I can, like, you know, play the shit out of the trombone or something, you know. I mean, for a long, this gets into my personal history too, though, because I trained as a classical trombone player a long time ago.
Really?
I did like 2 years of an undergraduate classical trombone degree at Northwestern University. That was my first 2 years of college, which was like, you know, classical trombone boot camp kind of place. And so I was totally immersed in that. And it was great. I learned a huge amount about music and about playing the trombone. It was a great environment. And there was even though that was like 100% classical, you know, environment, really, there was some exposure to jazz and some other things there, you know. But then I quit. I had this kind of crisis of realizing I didn't want to be an orchestral trombone player and not knowing what I really did want to do. So I quit and I left Northwestern, and that was the end of my formal music training. And I kept playing some, but that was when I started playing. I picked up bass guitar, and then a little bit later guitar and other instruments, and totally self-taught. Ended up around the punk rock scene in Raleigh, North Carolina, and around there, I went back to where I grew up. I was in school studying. At first I was on an engineering track, but then I switched to philosophy, and I ended up studying philosophy for 7 years.
Wow.
And during that time, I played the trombone a little bit, but I didn't play it in any focused or directed way. It wasn't my main thing. There was a guy, an old friend of mine, had dropped out of Berkeley as a guitar major after 1 year, and he was back in Raleigh. And so he and I would like get together and play through real book tunes and stuff, you know, just to try to deal with that somehow. But we were also playing punk rock together. That was kind of the main thing. And then for a while, I didn't play the trombone at all. I mean, there's this whole period of about 10 years where I wasn't working on it seriously, roughly from when I was about 20 to when I was about 30. And for the last few years of that, I like didn't touch it at all. I didn't play the trombone at all. And then when I got to Chicago, which was connected with being in graduate school in philosophy, I was looking for a way to get out of graduate school. I realized I didn't want to be an academic, and I met like some of the free jazz and free improvising players around Chicago at that time. So I kind of made this exit from grad school into that scene in the early 90s. And that was when I started picking up the trombone again. So this is all long-winded, but the point I was trying to get to was that for a long time, I didn't identify as a trombone player. And even after I started playing the trombone again, I still didn't really identify as a trombone player in the sense of someone who had spent all this time focusing on that and making that my identity, you know.
What would you, if you had to choose some kind of moniker, what would you identify as?
I mean, I'd like to be a musician, you know.
Nice.
But by musician, I mean someone who is involved in some way with the creation of music, you know. I don't identify being a musician with being an instrumentalist exclusively.
What does that mean for you?
being a musician.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, but it means someone who is involved in, I mean, it can mean different things for different people. For some people, it is being very focused on being an instrumentalist with a focus on this one instrument that they're completely bound up with, And I do have some, over the years since I started playing trombone again, which is quite a while now, I've gotten back to much more of that point with the trombone gradually, but sometimes I kind of feel like it's gone a little too far like that, Like I don't want to be just like wrapped up in this instrument like that. On the other hand, I love it and it's my main medium of expression, and I definitely need to have an ability to get around it and do whatever it is I want to do on it. But I don't know. Yeah, it's. I mean, how many hours a day am I going to spend working on lip slurs and double tonguing scales and stuff at this point? I mean, I do that, but trying to get it down. Actually, at this point, I can practice more efficiently, so I can work on certain concentrated things and get something out of it without having to. I mean, back in the day, I would do 5 hours in the practice room plus rehearsals and performances and stuff, and I put in a fair amount of time like that. So, I learned something about how the horn works and how to play it. I can draw on that whenever I need to, as long as I keep my basic thing in shape. Right. But the basic thing being in shape goes up and down during a pandemic. I can tell you that.
For sure.
Yeah. I don't know. How have you dealt with that? Have you had any kind of performance schedule, online or otherwise?
Oh no, everything was canceled. No performances. Yeah. I had one performance in the fall, which was actually kind of a special event. That was really nice. I have a friend who works for the Trustees, which is like a organization that manages the parks in the area. Yeah. And they were trying to put on music in this big park near Lower Mills, Dorchester. I think it was in Milton.
Okay.
And it was just like this big, expansive field. And they're like, hey, get your band to play. So I'm playing with this band called Kinazore, which is this led by a Mozambican guy. So we're doing his music.
Yeah.
So I played with Kinazore in this field, and it was like this. We played 2 sets. It was the Chinese New Year. I remember it was a full moon.
Oh, okay.
And like it was getting dark, and there was like a big full moon behind us. It was like all these people out in this field, with little twinkly lights lit up, and that was pretty special. That was nice as far as pandemic events, but
that sounds cool.
Yeah, it was like the first time we'd played in months. We haven't been rehearsing. We haven't been playing gigs. So it's kind of surreal after like many months barely talking to each other. Like, okay, we're here at the gig and it's time to play, unrehearsed. But it was fun. But yeah, nothing for me as far as gigs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you try to fill that up with working on other things, or?
I mean, I've been pretty motivated to practice, and I think what's helped me stay focused is just working through books. Like I finally decided I wanted to learn how to doodle tongue. I tried a couple of years I tried a couple times and just never got it.
Yeah.
So I finally bought the book by
the Bob McChesney book.
Yeah, the McChesney book, and I worked my way through it. That took me a while. Okay. So I can say I can doodle tongue. It's still not like a natural instinct, but I get the mechanics of it now. I kind of do it.
Yeah. Years ago in Chicago, I worked through part of that book, and I got to where, for me, that doodle tonguing is not. I don't think it's ever going to be like a natural thing that I turn to in performance, really. But working on it does something for loosening up everything in the mouth, and like was able to. I noticed like a wider general flexibility of approach to articulation after spending some time working on it.
Yeah.
And I still work on it sometimes. I'm not good at it, but I can like do the thing really slowly, and make things happen like that.
Yeah. So I've personally been just trying to keep practicing and work through some books. I got through that, and now I'm going through my old teacher, John
Mhm.
McNeil's book that he wrote with Laurie Frank. They
Oh
call
yeah,
it
the
Flexus.
Flexus book, right? Yeah,
So
I have that. I was doing that again quite a while ago. I went through. That's a great book. Yeah, there's some good things
it's
in there.
amazing. Yeah.
I still, yeah, for a long time I was using some of those warm ups every day. That particular version of the slurring through the harmonics, and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just I had this idea to do the podcast over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm finally trying to bring this to fruition. So
Mm-hmm.
here we are, and
Yeah.
trying to write music and record, just trying to keep busy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to learn more about recording at home. That is a project, something I should work on. And I have some gear and I have some ideas about gear to get that would let me go more in that direction. So that's a thing maybe for this year. Another thing I realized though is that, you feel like, okay, we're in this pandemic and there's all this time that you have to fill up and work on stuff. But really, I mean, you have all that time anyway, even when there's not a pandemic. So this is making me think about how I organize my time. And, when the pandemic's going to be gone, it's not like, oh, all of a sudden I don't have the time to learn these things anymore. I mean,
definitely.
If you want to learn these things, you can learn them whether there's a pandemic or not. If you want to work on these things, you can work on them even when there's not a pandemic.
For sure. For sure. Yeah, the pandemic has been interesting for that.
Yeah.
Kind of forcing us to turn our previous way of life kind of upside down, and now we're home all the time, and forces us to kind of face our lives in a different way. How do we structure our time? What are our priorities?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a big thing to think about. Yeah. And I mean, I've been fortunate anyway, because for a long time, since the 90s, I've had this, the way I make most of my money has been through this freelance translation stuff that I do.
Right.
And I was a translator in a law firm from about 1996 to 99. And that was like a full-time job. But then I went freelance in 1999. And ever since then, I've just worked at home completely on my own schedule, without having any other, job that I had to show up for other than that in music at all. So when the pandemic hit, for me, things didn't really change that much. I couldn't go out. I mean, the gigs dried up and I couldn't go out to restaurants and bars and stuff anymore. But everything else, the working at home is the same. The going to the grocery store is the same with the precautions in place. And so for me, it hasn't been as big. For one thing, it hasn't been an economic source of stress like it has been for a lot of people. So I'm really lucky that way. And also the change to working at home that a lot of people experienced was not a change for me because I was already working at home. So my wife started working at home. She's still doing the same job, but now she does it almost completely at home. So that's been different, but that hasn't been a difficult adjustment for us, really.
That's good. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird time we're living in for many reasons, but
for sure.
I wonder how we're gonna look back on all this, 5 years from now, what it's all gonna feel like. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic that, let's say, a year from now, at least the pandemic thing is gonna start to be really behind us. Maybe another pandemic will come along, who knows? But this one, I feel like we might get back to a semblance of normalcy by the end of 2021.
You think by the end, do you think it's going to be strong through the summer and fall?
I think it's impossible to predict, and I don't have any special knowledge or expertise, needless to say. I'm just going by what I hear about, what they're talking about vaccine distribution in this country and the initially way too optimistic things you were hearing. And then I've learned to kind of like take whatever, even the more measured, less optimistic predictions, and then like add some time to that. So, I mean, when this thing hit, I had this like large project that I did, this 8-piece band, 10-piece band called Every Opportunity that I had presented at the Lily Pad at the Drift Fest in 2019. It was a large group that I wrote like this large kind of suite of music for and presented it. And I really wanted to do that again and get it recorded. So I had this whole performance set up and rehearsal schedule set up with bringing 2 people in from out of town and getting all these schedules coordinated and booking recording studio time. And I was just getting to the point where I had to like really sit down and write all this music for it. And then the pandemic hit and everything got canceled. So I just had to scrap that. And I scrapped it already. It was supposed to be in early May, I think. And I scrapped it already still in March, probably, maybe April. I think it was even still March when I said, I don't think this is going to work, but maybe later in the year. So then we rescheduled it for early December, thinking at the time that, well, maybe things will look better by then. And instead, by early December, it was worse than it's ever been,
Right.
And it's just continued to get worse since then. Right now, it's still even now worse than it's ever been. And that makes me pessimistic, that it's obviously not going to clear up. I mean, I'm supposed to maybe go to Germany and do some stuff with these guys in March. And when that was originally talked about a few months ago, we were like, okay, maybe by March things will be okay. But as it is, I don't know. I mean, I doubt I'll be vaccinated by March.
That's only a couple months away.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think I'll be vaccinated by March. I don't know how travel is going to look. If there was some Europe stuff back in October and November that got canceled, largely because of travel restrictions on Americans going to Europe, then it was just too onerous to try to get around. And also I didn't even really feel comfortable doing it. So this one festival that, I tried in Austria, and I went back and forth with somebody at the Austrian consulate about what it would take. And it was like kind of ridiculous, onerous things that would have to happen. And then like 2 weeks before the festival, there was like renewed lockdowns in Austria and they canceled the festival anyway. So it wouldn't have happened. So just because of all this uncertainty and unpredictability, I don't know if this trip in March is going to happen. I don't feel that optimistic about it. And I don't know when I can start feeling like I can make solid plans again like that.
What do you think summer COVID 2021 is going to look like compared to last summer?
Well, again, how would I know? But I think by the summer, I think you can say that a not insignificant number of people will have been vaccinated by then. And maybe that'll start to make a difference. That's like the most optimistic I can be about it.
I guess I'm wondering, to me, it felt like only by the end of the summer and into the fall, we were sort of starting to get like socially distanced, responsible ways of performing here. And then by the point where it seemed like it was sort of feasible, it got too cold and you couldn't really do it outside anymore.
Yeah.
But do you think there's going to be more of that, or what do you think that could look like in the spring and summer?
I mean, once the weather starts to get nicer, the outdoor thing is cool. You can make that work. And I did a number of outdoor gigs over the last 9 months or whatever that were fun, and maybe, what the new landscape is going to look like, maybe that'll become a more frequently seen scenario. If a lot of clubs are closed or not yet willing to have crowds come into the space, I mean, maybe we'll see more outdoor stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a bad solution.
Yeah.
But, I do miss clubs. I miss playing at the Lily Pad.
Yeah.
It feels like a zillion years ago now. My last kind of official indoor gig was last early March, I think. Maybe it was still February, with Cutout at the Lily Pad.
Yeah.
And that was like right at this time when we were right on the brink. And even at that last gig, I remember people were very wary. Yeah. Nobody shook hands, and, it was like sparse. Nobody wanted to get too close together. And then here we are playing horns in a small space, like blowing spit all over the place. And that was it. That was the last time.
Yeah. So any big music plans for the future whenever COVID is over?
Well, that larger ensemble thing I mentioned, Every Opportunity, I really wanted. I'm not giving up on doing that. So when it seems like reasonable to actually book a solid date for that, I want to do that and write the music for it. I have some other writing ideas in my head that I should sit down and get to, but I don't want to talk about them since they're just ideas. I mean, I'd love to, just start playing regularly again with Cutout and doing free improvisation gigs that I used to do. I mean, I was playing once or twice a month with Charlie Colhase's Explorers Club for probably 3 or 4 years before all this hit. So it'd be great to start doing that again. I don't know. I hope some venues come back and maybe people will find some new venue solutions. Maybe house shows will come back.
Yeah.
The house show thing, I also meant to mention there's a guy here, Eric Zinman, piano player. Do you know him?
No, I don't know.
He's an improvising pianist, but he has a nice place in Cambridge and he's had some house shows there. He has a piano in his living room, and a couple times I got to do some cool shows there. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are some of the best shows, I think.
Yeah.
Some of my favorites for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do feel like something's going to come back.
Yeah.
It has to.
I heard somebody make an analogy that this will be the roaring 20s. This is going to be our roaring 20s. And once COVID is over, everyone's going to go nuts and party for a
It's
while.
not too hard to imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, climate change isn't getting any better through all of this, so it's kind of, everybody's kind of forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Or at least I haven't heard as much talk about it. But yeah, I mean, maybe when it's possible to do, maybe there'll be this explosion of new kinds of activity. It's going to feel renewed in a way to be able to go and do that kind of thing again, I think.
Definitely a much huger sense of appreciation just for the opportunity to go out and fraternize and play music and see shows.
Yeah, maybe it'll teach us that we should never take it for granted,
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful lesson.
Yeah.
And as the venues are shuttering and musicians are struggling, I think it's maybe illuminating about the way that our society values the players and the institutions, the places, or doesn't value, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's been an issue related to the economics of trying to be a performing musician anyway for a long time, but it does kind of put it in a new light.
Yeah.
Like how much does this mean to people, that this thing that probably a lot of people, including us, really kind of took for granted forever, and now you realize you can't take it for granted.
Sure.
A lot of the venues are going to be gone, so you can't. So what kind of hole does that leave, and how is it going to get filled?
Yeah, it's the classic trope, but people always talking about the venue leaves and then they build a condo, but it's true. I mean, I don't know, Johnny D's, I go through Davis Square and it's a condo now. Or did you ever know the Space? They just call it the Space in JP. It was super close to the Green Street station. It was around the block. It was a really nice space, but that one again got demolished and they're building condos.
Isn't that what happened to Riles?
Riles, same thing.
Aren't they doing condos there? Yeah.
So at what point do we say, the artists and these venues, they provide something to the city, the various cities, not just Boston, Cambridge, and the surrounding cities, a huge amount of value that makes the city so much more desirable and interesting. And if those things are gone, and if you have condos, if you have all these luxury condos and abundance of luxury housing, who's going to want to live there? I mean, maybe people do, but I guess the city is far more bland, kind of decrepit culturally.
That's the thing. Yeah, I mean, they have a large economic value too, as a matter of fact, but also the intangible things you're talking about. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like I have anything wise to say, but I hear everything you're saying.
Yeah. But it's comforting to know that we're here and we're pushing. You're a Boston Bone, Bos Bone. I'm a Bos Bone. We're here. We're trying each of our various niche and a niche. We're trying to
We're
make
just
stuff
waiting.
work. Yeah.
Next door there's a good clarinet player who lives next door, a guy called Michael Prentky, and over the holidays, like the evenings leading up to Christmas, we got together more or less safely on our front porch, and we would play holiday songs.
Oh, that's nice.
Like at 7:00 every night. It was kind of my wife Jackie's idea, and she called it Horns in the Wild. She wanted to. She was like, "You guys should get together and play, Christmas songs on the porch." So we did that every night for a few nights,
That's
culminating on Christmas with "Joy to the World" or something, And it was fun. It was a good thing to do. It felt like a good community, a way to be together with some people, and it was a good feeling, And I usually hate Christmas music, and I'm not even that big a fan of the entire Christmas juggernaut in general, but this year being able to do that just felt like, okay, this is actually a nice thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's the sinking ship. It's the Titanic. We're here. Right. As the ship sinks, we're here trying to make it better.
Play some music on the ship while it's going down. Well, see, I don't think the ship's going to go all the way under. Well,
that's good.
Maybe it will. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know, we can't know, but we're doing our best to keep playing, and
yeah. Speaking of that, reminds me, a few years ago, there was a guy. Again, I'm going to forget his name, but I got called to do an evening. I guess they were organized do you know about this? These like trombone ensembles would get together and do these like arrangements of holiday songs downtown, and you would go outside on the what?
The bid.
I don't know.
The Business Improvement District.
Oh yeah.
Downtown Crossing. That's where we first met. The bid gigs.
Was that what it was? Was that where I met you?
Yeah.
Okay. And who's the guy who did those arrangements? So that guy's a bass
Joe
trombone.
Ricard.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, I went down and did one of those. It's kind of fun to think back on that now. I mean, that was definitely a Boston trombone event that I did. That was either the first or second holiday season that I was here that I went down and did that.
Yeah.
Those were good arrangements.
Yeah, Joe's a great writer.
Yeah.
Great player, great writer.
Yeah. Is he still in Boston?
I think he just moved to the West Coast indefinitely.
Oh, shit. Okay.
I think he grew up in the Bay Area,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah.
I think he maybe went back there, or maybe went to San Diego. I'm not sure. But
okay.
Yeah, I think he left indeterminately. He may or may not come back. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
are you from around here, or did you grow up somewhere else?
I grew up in the area. I grew up an hour south of Boston in a suburban town called Hanover. I also lived in Hingham, and then I moved to Hanover a little bit later as a kid. Yeah, not a lot to say about those places. I don't go back.
I don't know. I have so little. Before we moved to Boston, I had been here essentially only to play gigs over the years, and that quite a few times, but I didn't have any knowledge at all of how Boston is laid out or connected. I don't even know if I had actually heard of Jamaica Plain before we moved here. But we had to, between the interval between when my wife took this job and we actually landed here was about 6 weeks, and we had to pack everything up, figure out where we were going to live here without actually coming here to look. So we had Nate Mcbride, the bass player, helped us out with that to some extent. And we were looking online and talking to different people and trying to figure all this out. We landed on JP because it's close to where she works, and we heard it was but yeah, my knowledge of this area is still very limited. We don't have a car, so I don't really drive around much. I drive when I have to, but Boston is very difficult to drive in, and finding your way around here because of the way the streets are laid out is, as you know, challenging.
Sure.
But then the whole thing with all the like the surrounding areas, suburbs or towns that are close by, I still don't have any real clear sense of all that.
Yeah. Yeah, I miss JP. I lived there for a bunch of years.
You know, every single musician I meet in Boston tells me they used to live in JP.
Yeah.
I guess it used to be cheap, and then it got too expensive, and it is too expensive. I mean, we're doing it, but it's financially challenging. But whatever.
Yeah, I mean, JP is great. Yeah. Yeah. Having a car, when I got a car a couple of years ago, that made a big difference for being able to explore. So that has been fun, being able to explore the city a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I already did that on a bike. I was biking a lot. So
yeah.
But,
well, it's weird with Boston because it's actually very small, like
right.
geographically. I mean, compared to Chicago is enormous. It covers a huge amount of space, but it's a grid, right? But Boston is a lot smaller, so it takes a long time to drive anywhere. But you could walk, to a lot of places with it pretty reasonably.
I want to add a caveat that I think downtown Boston is what people associate with Boston and is small, but there's actually a lot more to Boston, which is actually pretty sizable, but is not usually accounted for in like the collective mentality about what Boston is.
Yeah.
But thinking about Dorchester, which is huge, and Mattapan and Hyde Park, which are huge, like, I don't know, twice or three times the size of like the downtown, like South End, Back Bay, Boston area.
Yeah.
But it's kind of it's kind of segregated. That's kind of the mostly black area of town.
Yeah.
But it's huge. I mean, it's also part of Boston. Yeah. There's a lot to the city. I think a lot more than people.
There's a lot more
know.
I could find out about it for sure. Yeah. I mean, I haven't, partly because of the age I was at when we landed here. I mean, I was in my 50s and we landed in this new place. And, when I first went to Chicago to live there, I was still in my 20s, and your whole attitude then towards getting out and around and exploring stuff is different then.
Yeah.
And here I just haven't, I've been like, well, I already had like kind of a musical slot to some extent I could drop into, which determined some things I was doing as soon as I got here. And then other than that, it was just kind of like, well, where do I go buy food? And that I didn't have this big urge to poke around and discover all these things about the city. And we have done it to some extent, but there's lots of parts of the town I haven't really been to, or I've only driven through or ridden through or been to once or something. There's a lot more I could find out about it for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I don't know. Any other burning questions for the...
I think that's maybe a great place to kind of wrap this up with a bow. There's a lot we can both learn about this place.
Yes.
It's just kind of fun. Is. It's fun to explore, even if it's not physically, just learning.
Yeah. Well, one day we can get out there again.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining me in doing this and giving me a little bit of your time to talk and share all of your amazing experiences and knowledge and perspective. I really appreciate it.
Here, just for the trombone players, this is my current mouthpiece.
This is a Doug Elliott trombone talk.
Doug Elliott. We got to nerd out a little bit. This is a Doug Elliott thing I started using actually during the pandemic. I decided to switch over, and I did an online lesson with Doug, which was really good for some basic stuff about embouchure and my buzz and things like that. And then I wound up for years and years and years, I was playing 6.5 AL. And then he got me onto this basically larger rim, but smaller cup setup. So it's like a 102 rim, which is almost like a Bach 4 in that vicinity. And then what he calls a C+ cup, which is significantly shallower. But it's been great. It's kind of revelatory for me. So
that's very funny that you bring up Doug. I have my own Doug story of the quarantine.
Oh yeah.
I sent my mouthpiece out to get gold plated.
Yeah.
I think I have like acidic skin or something. I kind of eat through the metal.
Yeah.
And all the gold had been worn off of my mouthpiece, and
Yeah.
I like the feel of the gold.
Yeah.
So I called up Doug and asked if he would plate it, and he said, yeah, to do it right, I'm gonna have to silver plate it, gold plate it, whatever. But because of the quarantine, I'm low on gold. There's a gold shortage.
Huh.
So you might have to wait a little bit. It could be a month or two before I get my next gold shipment. So I said, okay, it's fine. It's quarantine. I can wait, whatever. So I mailed in my mouthpiece, and then he had it for many months, and I still haven't gotten it back. So I've gotten increasingly angry with him, and I started emailing him saying, like, what the hell's going on? And actually just yesterday, I called him on the phone, and he finally picked up, and he said in a previous email, and he repeated on the phone yesterday, hey man, like, I'm sorry, I think I lost it, like, which one was it that you sent me again? And then he'd mistakenly thought I sent him another mouthpiece, so I corrected in his mind which one it was. So now he knows the correct mouthpiece to look for. But in the meantime, he sent me one of his mouthpieces. So it should be coming in the mail within a day or two. So both you and I are going to switch more or less from a 6.5 mouthpiece to a Doug Elliott mouthpiece. So that's a funny.
Well, his stuff is the only other stuff that has stuck for me. So, I mean, over the years I've played some of his things off and on, but I was never totally happy with him. But then he did something where he redesigned his backbores last year, and something about this new backboard design clicked for me a lot better, like a lot more open feel.
Wow.
Do you know what he's sending you exactly? Did he tell you?
I don't remember what he said he was going to send me, but he said it was something that was similarly comparable to what I had, which was a Bach 6.5 AL megatone, which I had a lot of custom work done on the rim. So that it was like less rounded on the inner rim. It was more just like straight.
Yeah. I mean, his rims are kind of like that anyway. They're a little flatter.
Yeah.
But well, you let me know what you think. I like his stuff a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Well,
we could do a whole other episode about mouthpieces, but we should probably avoid that. Yeah.
Oh man, I know nothing about mouthpieces. I'm not really a gear guy at all, but if you want to talk about it another time, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that. But let's call it for today.
Okay, man.
Right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeb.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you invited me, and I'm honored to be the premiere episode, or maybe I won't be the premiere episode, but at least your first interviewee. Yeah, and I'm gonna work on that theme thing for you too. So cool. I got an idea, so I just sit down and do it.
Amazing.
Yeah. All right, man.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Yep.
Peace. See you.
Ciao. Take it easy.
Thanks for listening. Comments, questions? Send me an email at bosbonespodcast@gmail.com. That's BOSBONES podcast@gmail.com. Or follow me on Instagram, YouTube, or Spotify. You can learn more about Jeb at jebbishop.com. Trombone Icon by Gregory Montigny from thenounproject.com. Special thanks to Celine and Jeffrey. Bos Bones theme written by me, Michael Prentky. Bos Bones themes 1, 2, and 3 recorded and arranged by Jeb Bishop. Again, please follow at Bos Bones on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify, or visit at michaelprentky.com/Bos Bones. Thanks for listening. See you next time.